we've lifted, we've saunaed, we've ate. We spent an hour and a half setting up this fucking podcast.
We ran to my mom's, got more batteries.
We found batteries.
The world doesn't
this
need
is
details.
The least professional episode of the least professional podcast that has ever existed. And that's all people need to know.
And I think based on if they listen to the previous episode, they know we're friends. And other than that, they don't need to know shit else.
Yeah. Which your old episode, I think, was a good... Do you remember when we did that? It was pre-Money. It was before you worked at Money 2020, yeah?
I think it was right as I joined Money 2020, I want to say.
Okay.
Because I think if I remember correctly, I was able to speak openly about my previous company in a way that
That's right.
maybe wouldn't have had I still been there. You know?
Yeah, I've been
might have changed my
exposed. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So there's like a little more than a year probably there. And you just had the craziest week of your career, the biggest week of your career so far.
You could say a year, but boiling it down to a week for sure.
Yeah,
yes.
well, I think it's like, which is an interesting pyramid, like the biggest week of your career, which was a year in the making, which was 15 years in the making. At least.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a couple different like layers of this episode that I'm excited to do. One is just kind of like, how was that fucking week? Let's talk about what happened.
Yeah.
I was there at Money 2020. And so like part of it is I think Money 2020 recap of like, I think it's really interesting to kind of like, it's an interesting perspective to check in on the world of fintech and just try to like see where we've come, where we're going, like using that 1 week snapshot of the biggest fintech conference in the world and like what the industry's up to. And like, there's no better person to talk to than you, who's like behind the scenes MC, like,
but there's also no
Hugh
better
Jackmaning,
person.
the greatest showmaning.
I mean,
the whole thing.
If we're talking like fitness, I'll take it. But I don't know about like I still haven't seen The Greatest Showman, so I feel like I need to.
There's a lot more singing than there was at Money 2020.
Exactly. I mean, I sang as much as I could, but it was a lot more dancing. I mean, but the other thing is like, yeah, I was behind the scenes. Yeah, I planned the whole thing. Yeah, or not planned the whole thing. That is way
you planned the content.
I am in charge of the team. I am, one of the main team members that builds the content.
Yeah.
But what I would say is the most interesting place to start maybe is actually your experience, because you came into it as like a little Bambi vibe of like, you know, fintech to some degree because we spent so much time together. You know it because of your investing. You know it because of like just being a nerd. You know it because of how deep you've gone into crypto and Web3. But you also simultaneously, as you've told me, don't know it.
No.
Right?
I get tech, but like fintech, I underestimated the degree to which like it's its own world.
Yeah.
And how much it totally revolves around banks. Like going to that conference, I was kind of like, oh, this is like VCs and finance and investment banks and like everybody who does money things will be there. And leaving was kind of like, oh, that was all geared towards selling shit to banks of all scales and sizes. And I don't know, maybe that's like a really obvious fact inside. I think it's fine.
Let's go with it.
Let's roll with
it. Yeah. Who needs video?
It's
No, it is that. It is. It's because of the regulatory and policy oriented system that we have in the US, and this is something that I think you really, to your point, have to be in fintech to understand. This is the thing. This is the like hilarious part to me about our relationship is, and our friendship is like, you have like pulled me with you through portions of my life. Like, I feel like you were just enough further along enough in your like life development, career development. You're married, I'm not. Like these, like
I'm a little older.
You're a little older, but not so much. But there's a really interesting kind of thread there with that makes me most of the time while we're talking feel like, God damn it, I need to read, or like, oh, shit. Like how, like what, how the fuck do you know that? Like, and it's all stuff that I innately understand for the most part, but you're the one that goes back and says, Robert Cialdini said this versus like, I heard once, and I'm looking at a Robert Cialdini book is the only reason I pulled that name out of my ass. But it is fascinating how much of a differentiator that is, because as soon as we start talking about the FDIC, or as soon as we start talking about banks sub Durbin versus over Durbin versus, versus a community bank versus a big five. Like the nuances there, I don't think I ever understood how deep they were until I was able to talk about some of this stuff with you. And then you like your eyes glaze over and you're like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah. And that conference is a really interesting way to see like the whole nexus that is fintech. Like there's regulators there, there's banks there, there's capital providers there of all scales, there's startups, there's crypto, there's like it's a crazy sort of mess of stuff. And it's so much bigger. It is both bigger and weirder and more of a like unique like subculture of an industry where like, and I was like, do all these people know what the fuck each other are talking about? Or like, am I the only
that's
one?
the crazy part is no, like, and that's the weirdest part about my job probably is that I have to like
get all
growing up the way I grew up. I think I've just kind of always been, and I think some people don't like this term, but code switching, right? Like
what does that mean?
So because I grew up, Kansas City being the incredibly, we were just talking about this actually, so I'll pull it in. So as we were going to make sure that this podcast actually worked, which I hope we're recording, the drive that we did from my house to my mom's where we picked up the batteries was 2 blocks. I live very close to my mom because she's my person and like I'm here to support her, yada, 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 and also kind of convenient when you need batteries. So we do the 2, we do
quit put me on blast about the fucking batteries.
We do the 2 block drive. We come back and like kind of start a little conversation about like the weird differentiation associated with like a 1 block shift, right?
Kansas City, very diverse, but very segregated.
Very, just call it racist. I mean, it's just like inherently deeply racist and has been for as long as all the way back to segregation. We held on to segregation a lot longer than most cities. And as a result of that, I grew up on the black side of the city, for lack of a better term. When I talk to my black friends about it, they're like, yes, that's how you should say it. When I talk to my white friends about it, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe you said that. There's no black side of the city. So
it's like, because you haven't been there.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, okay, you're uncomfortable about it because you have no black friends. So growing up in that situation and going to a very weird French immersion school in a very low income area with very wealthy kids, but also very like we had like the daughter of a very, very successful entrepreneur who was funding part of the school. So that's why she was there. But then we also had kids that like would only make 50% of classes because they were taking care of their sister and like, you know, living in Section 8 housing and whatever. So because of that and coming from the lower socioeconomic side, but wanting to seeing an avenue out because of my skin color, seeing an avenue out that wasn't just sports. Like I saw that there was a very clear way out for a certain group of people, and there was a different way out potentially for a different group of people. And I was so young, I didn't understand the racial layers to that. I was just like, oh, we go these ways, right? And my mom was always just kind of like, pretty much the only way you're gonna figure this out is business. So by accident, when I was a kid, I realized that like I had a set of black friends. I had a set of like Mexican friends. I had like a set of white friends. Like it's just like normal segregation of humans because of language, because of experience, because of culture. And mostly my white friends would get really angry at me a lot of the time, especially like as I got a little older, my white girlfriends would be like, you act so different around this group. You act so different around that group. And you know me well enough. You've probably actually seen this without thinking about it certain times. Like my voice changes, my diction changes, my vibe changes, like all of that. And it's actually that code switching thing is also a thing in fintech because the way that you talk to
a startup founder,
I mean, let's like go all the way out there and be weird as shit about it. Like the way that you talk to an SBF, right? Like in this moment, like, well, if through bars or wherever we're at, but the way that you talk to like that kind of or like Ryan O'Connor, one of our best friends who is just so goddamn smart, but you just have to understand how to ask the question to get them to the right place to make them feel comfortable to actually get to a place to have a relationship with them, right? And to learn from them versus a banker is just kind of what you think they are. Right. And especially a community banker is really just kind of what you think they are. But then like a big 5 bank executive is a very different person than a community bank executive, is a very different person than a regulator, and there's like, excuse me, was like 20 to 30 subsets in that ecosystem. And you have to be able to, one, communicate with all of them, be empathetic with all of them, understand all of them, and understand who should be connected to who, when, why, and where.
Yeah.
There's layers.
Create content for all of them, see the interactions between them,
Mm-hmm.
project how that's going to affect like the future of fintech through infrastructure and
actually
consumer
connect them. I mean, that's the other thing is like by accident, I'm sitting at this like nexus of all these fascinating humans, and like you just kind of sit sometimes there are moments over the last year where I've sat there and I've been like, you don't know you. If you two came together, you don't know it yet, but you could build $1 billion company or whatever, right?
Yeah.
All it takes is an email in some of these situations. And like you and I guess have been doing that for a long time, but there's something different about like, hey, go grab coffee.
Yeah.
Than like, oh, I see this piece of value, I see that piece of value, bring them together, and like 2 + 2 = $1 million.
Yeah. And it's a little bit of the perspective you have about being on top of the maze. Like you can't go so deep in any one subculture that you belong to it. You have to see sort of the connections of all of them. And it's so interesting. Like, I don't know, maybe the right structure is to talk through the way you thought about content. So like, I know it's taken a year to sort of derive the, like, there's main themes and then there's like tracks and like, is that like a decent structure for sort of showing the world of fintech?
I mean, I think unpacking the world of fintech is a thing. Should we start with like what your first impression of the show was? We started a little bit with that, but
sure,
I'm still wondering if I'm sitting here and I have no idea what Money 2020 is. Like,
all right, Money 2020 is the biggest fintech conference in the world.
Yes.
There's one in Vegas, which is, I think, the biggest. Yep. There's also one in Amsterdam. There will soon be one in
Bangkok, baby, 2024.
And it encompasses all of the sort of subcultures and people and stuff that we've mentioned, like financiers, bankers, regulators, startups, everything. There's a fucking huge expo center. There's 3 days of content. And interestingly, 4 days of content, pardon me. There is also this, which is like new, this scale of conference is new to me. There was like, I don't know, 15,000 people there or something. Is fucking enormous. The scale of that conference meant there was like this meeting culture, which I thought was really interesting. And like, I hadn't seen it before because I mostly go to smaller conferences where you just kind of like rely on serendipity. This is like, you literally count the meetings that happen.
Yep.
And they're scheduled like through the app of the conference. People search the thing, and I got all these emails before going of people like, "Let's schedule a meeting." I was like, "Are you crazy? I'm not going to schedule a meeting during a conference. Like, you go and you be serendipitous. Like, I can't be responsible for being at table 97 at 1 p.m.
Right.
That's insane.
It's
but it's 100% how this works, or at least for people who are like, you know, a startup trying to close banking customers, or a startup trying to a company trying to meet investors or whatever. So that was an interesting thing.
But think about the ROI, right?
Oh,
like,
that's incredible.
Well, but that you have to do that to make it worth it.
Yeah.
Right. That's the thing, is like a lot of the serendipity associated with like a capital camp.
Yeah.
Right. Or like a 200, 300 person, like the serendipity there is one, like you're barely passing Dunbar's number.
Yeah.
Right. And
you
like,
can stand in the room and be like,
exactly.
That's the person I need to talk to.
Yeah. And like, Shane and Brent and like, you know, you're just like, I know enough of it kind of is Dunbar's number because you know 50 of them.
Right. Yeah.
And then it's 150 you don't know. And then you need to go meet them. And then from there, you know, it's.
And this is like half the fucking Venetian is just people wearing these tags and like running in every direction at all times.
Yeah. But to pay off your, you know, anywhere between $2,000 to $6,000 ticket, like, you got to take some meetings pretty.
And that's before you get a booth, right? So what are the booths run?
Actually, I really, thank God, don't know. Luckily, that's something I don't have to deal with. But I mean, we're not talking $1,000.
No, it was cool. I went in there. I was like, oh, this is cool. I'll go like find some startups and like.
Well, that's the thing,
like
is
zero people before Series A can afford a booth at this thing.
You and I we walked by a couple, but it was like embarrassing. I think you pointed them out. You were like, is that one okay? But it was like a seed company that had like a table, like that scene in Silicon Valley. Like Silicon Valley, I think I can't remember if it's 2 or 3 where they do the pineapples. You
Oh,
know,
yeah,
they
yeah,
go
yeah,
hide
yeah.
the pineapples around Hoolicon.
Yep.
Like that silicon, the Pied Piper table
Yeah.
is probably similar to like some of those seed stage tables.
Yeah.
But then you saw like MasterCard or Finicity or
Yeah,
like
they
who had
built
like
a house there for.
I mean those they're spending way more than most people make in a year.
And all right, so the Expo Center is another place that I got. Well, tell me if I think I have this right. So you walk around the Expo Center, and you're like, all right, these are the like Series B companies. They're still working on giant banks. A bunch of them are competing directly. It seems like. But they kind of fall into buckets.
Yeah.
And
a lot of them competing directly.
Yeah,
That's a very good take. A lot of people don't really realize that. If they don't come from the industry, they don't see that, and you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and so the buckets that sort of form for me are like crypto custody for banks, identity verification through biometrics. I saw Palm, I saw Face, I saw Iris.
Yep.
But like basically trying to get to the sort of like Chinese WhatsApp, like scan a body part, and that's your inherent payment wallet identity system with that bank or that whole payment provider.
You've kind of been paying a little bit of attention to Sardine too.
A little bit. That feels more abstract to me.
So that's the thing is like that whole world, the idea of biometrics from my point of view is like a little bit more the 2019-y vibe. Like if you track, I don't know how much you've talked about Triple Blind on the podcast or talked about Dawes or.
No, you've got a great episode with Dawes actually.
Yeah, the audio is a little bit rough, but it's worth it because it's Dawes. I mean, that man is just so smart. So for the background, Eric and I are both really good friends and you can say it, investors. And we had to have a moment of looking at each other.
Can't not say it.
I mean, it feels like we have to say it, if anything. Investors in a company called Triple Blind, who the founder of was previously at a company called iVerify, where they were doing iris biometric scanning, right? So eye scanning. And if you talk to him, he would say that like that company was sold at the right time because that technology is no longer necessarily the technology is beatable at this point. It takes a lot of work to beat it in a way that like a fraud ring probably isn't going to try and do at this point. But interestingly enough, most of the really cutting edge anti-fraud or IDV things are actually a lot more about behavioral analysis during sign up. So Sardine and NeuroID are as two examples, like have a lot to do with just mouse tracking if you're switching back and forth from this tab to that tab, things and like there's very like consistently statistically significant behavior that you can grab a fraudster from, but it also increases the pull through on
fraudster
KYC.
Meaning like bot versus human.
Fraudster really meaning potentially both. There's, I mean, at this point, like the fraud. There was a story that got written by a company that was like kind of an April Fool's joke, a company called Alloy. And they were like, this is the biggest fundraise in the history of fintech. And it was a story about how a company had raised $100 billion. But it was actually a joke about how much these fraud rings have stolen and how they ran some math that got it up to like $100 billion or whatever. And I opened it being like, holy shit, who raised $100 billion? And then I'm like,
was this Adam Newman again?
Exactly. Exactly. Oh, here, A16Z again. And it was actually just like a joke about fraud rings. But fraud rings fraud rings are as smart as the people trying to stop the fraud. In a lot of cases, smarter.
There were a ton of fraud prevention was a big bucket, and then payment rails, which I don't even know what that is, but there was a bunch of payment rails people competing for banking customers, I assume. Yeah. But it was interesting, like the identity verification and crypto custody to me were interesting because I think there's like they were big ass booths. They were clearly showing traction over multiple years with banks. And I'm kind of like, what's at this conference on this floor is going to be rolled out to customers in 3 years, give or take 18 months by different banks. So like that's an interesting kind of like, like my crypto wallet might just live in my bank's bank account. Or my bank might have my, fingers or palms or face or whatever, and that might be rolled out to point of sale systems and that like
or none of that exists. It all gets extrapolated away, and we actually do what the fuck we should do, which is take the first actual financial innovation that we've had in maybe a century, which is newer versions of the blockchain, not the Bitcoin blockchain, but newer versions of the blockchain. And we actually think about some middle ground version of like the classical TradFi version of the rails that we've had, and that bring them together and extrapolate away all this bullshit in this whole conversation and just actually make financial innovation happen for the first time in like an actual fucking century.
Don't the like banks have to switch away from core does crypto have to replace the core providers for that to happen?
No. So what needs to happen is actually a lot more on the policy level, interestingly, than it is about. So there's technology and policy problems.
Yeah.
What?
I remember like our last podcast, I was like, what's the most high leverage, what's the most important thing in fintech? And you were like, regulation. I was like, damn it. But also you can feel it at that conference, right? Like the undercurrent or the question looming over like all these panels, it wouldn't even think have to do with regulation by the title. They're always talking about that. Oh, we need more clarification from regulators. We need more speed from regulators. We're not sure we can do that. Or this innovation exists, but we're not sure it's legal to roll out. Or
that's so funny.
Or it's a panel of regulators being like, this is why you don't need more clarity. You just need to fucking do it.
Yeah.
And it's such a bigger part of the conversation than you would think, or than it seems like in other industries.
There's a couple layers to that are actually really fascinating. So I work with somebody that I perceive to be one of the smartest people in the world. Her name's Rachel Morrissey. And she's been doing her job on the Money 2020 content team that's similar to mine. It's just like stratifications of responsibility and whatever. But Rachel also runs the podcast. Like, she's so sharp, and she comes from a theater background, not a fintech background, but is just such a nerd that she's learned this industry incredibly well. But she's come at it with this, like, from the point of view of the audience sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, she pretty much refuses to talk about anything as regulation oriented. The most she will say is policy, but her and I both have this like Trojan horse in every piece of content for the most part that we're putting together, which is, let's make this absolutely fascinating, but for the most part it's a conversation about regulation. It's a conversation about technology. It's a conversation with
you did that shit on purpose.
1,000,000%.
Interesting.
Million%.
That's why you were smiling at me like a wise old wizard when I said that.
I mean, it's the only way. There's kind of like buckets of this, right? Like, there's inspirational content that's like, we had Serena Williams, right? Like, Serena Williams gets on stage, talks about being Serena Williams. She's Serena.
Like, I've got a VC. It's great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Like, we had Derek Jeter on stage at the end of that day. Yeah. Super freaking inspiring. Like, it was those pieces are amazing. From my point of view, though, the most valuable content is the content. The most valuable content is regulators sitting down and sharing their point of view with you. That's something you can't get anywhere else in public. It's really hard to get behind the scenes. Yeah. And it's really, really, really hard to get them to say things even that you need to read between the lines of. Much less having ex-regulators come, and we had that off the record stage that you did an interview on, where they could actually be honest. You know, so that's the best, and then the second is the Trojan horse. But go ahead.
Well, we should explain the off-the-record stage is like
it's a thing.
Your brainchild, right?
Everything. I would say like a little bit, because of the seed of the idea was mine, because I was always really frustrated as an attendee that I went to Money 2020 I think 4 times before I joined. And I was always very frustrated by going to see someone that I absolutely thought of as a hero, and then they told me, I wish money moved faster. Yeah. It's like, no shit. We have 4-day settlement. We all agree. Yeah. You're one of the smartest people in this entire industry. Why is this the thing that you're choosing to say to me? Yeah. And they're like, I can't really say anything else because I might get in trouble. So the idea of a stage in which yonder pouches so nobody can have access to their phone, the silent disco headphones, so that nobody can even really like interact with each other and react. Like, you're just kind of listening in your own little world. Yeah. And the piece where you're totally blocked in and they wouldn't let anyone in. Yeah. All of that adds some layers.
It's a fun stage to be on. Yeah, you're in the corner, everybody's phone's locked up. Like, you're very specifically not recording those sessions. Yeah, and I think like that was a brilliant thing to get. I have been to many conferences where it's like you put somebody, they're fascinating, but you put them on stage and they become so defensive, or can't share the sort of candid stuff that you would get in a one-on-one conversation, especially with regulators where you're like, man, this is the person making the decision. Like, I really do want to know what they think. Like, how, how does this progress? How do we unlock this thing?
I think you were there for that CFPB announcement. I can't remember. Did I make you MC a stage or something? I feel like I made you do a bunch of shit on Tuesday, and I don't know if you were actually able to see that.
Can't remember. Yeah. Tuesday, I blacked out.
Okay.
Tuesday was a blur.
I think, the wild part about this year is I think, from my point of view, the biggest moment was actually a 20-minute... I don't know about the biggest moment. That's a hard one. But the moment that got me just going, like fucking going, was the director of the CFPB, Rohit Chopra, getting up on stage.
And what is the CFPB?
The CFPB is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is a regulatory body. It's a cross regulators. So they're a bizarre regulatory institution because their ability to kind of do anything in terms of, like, I don't want to overstate it in terms of their lack of power, but they have a lot of directional power and a lot less prosecutorial is like the wrong term, but a lot less of an ability to, if you break the rule, hold your feet to the fire. Okay. Right? They're
not an enforcement agency.
Enforcement is the word I was looking for.
Guide,
Thank you. Yeah.
The guide policy or the guide enforcement.
Yeah. They set a road for you to walk down, and if you pick a different road to walk down, then one of the other regulators at that point will probably step in. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was a Obama invention post 2008 as a result of maybe not protecting consumers the way that we should have been at certain points. Just a thought. I don't know. Subprime was fun. We had a good time.
Well, the mortgage brokers did anyway.
Well, yeah. We love a good derivative. Now I'm thinking about 2008. Where were we going? Oh, that's right. Okay, so the CFPB was put in place in 2008. There's a really interesting thing that happened recently, which is the Fifth Circuit, I think, of New York, basically not cut their funding, but I don't want to say cut, or I don't want to put a term to it, but their funding is in an interesting place. And as a regulatory institution, not necessarily understanding the future of your funding is a fascinating thing. So there's like a hypothetical world in which 5-10 years from now, I don't know all the details of it. Maybe they don't exist. I don't know. Who knows? Anything can happen. And with this specific regulatory institution that was invented 13 years ago, 14 years ago, 13, 14, we'll see. It's
not Lindy yet.
It's the likelihood that it exists as long as the FDIC does. I don't know. I would be kind of shocked, but a lot of it depends on the next administration. And Republican administrations are not a fan of the CFPB because they view them as overbearingly regulating.
So what was their announcement?
So the announcement was about open banking, which the UK already has, most of Europe already has. It's basically the ability for you to say, okay, I'm a Chase customer and I want to not be a Chase customer anymore. I want to be a NBKC or like a lead bank customer, or like I don't know, I want to move to Bank of America, whatever. This ruling, Rule 1033, would, as it actually becomes real policy, would basically say, one, that you have the right to be forgotten. Right? So you can say, delete all my data, and if you don't delete all my data, and if I don't have proof thereof, basically, which is hard to prove, but if you don't do that, then you're out of compliance and you are violating a financial rule.
And you'll get a class action lawsuit probably, or a regulator
inspection. If there's no chance that they're doing it to just one person, probably. Right. So it would end up in a class action, I would imagine. That's pretty much the only way that shakes out. Okay. So that's one piece. The second piece is making it easier to actually make the move. Excuse me. That's what the UK has figured out. They've actually done a pretty good job of figuring out and building ramps, off ramps from this bank, on ramps to this bank, in a way that makes sure that consumers are actually able to end up in the right financial products with the right financial institutions and not getting totally fucked.
Yeah.
That's just kind of an expected thing over there now. They also have a very
How recently did that happen?
5, 6, 8 years, something like that. Like,
it's not like they've just always had this right.
No. A lot of it really came as a result of the neobanks.
Okay.
So the other thing about the UK is that Revolut, Monzo, like those groups are actual banks.
Like neobanks worked there.
Because they're actual banks.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Is neobanks worked here. They just worked in a very different way because of the necessity of these sponsor banks behind them.
Yeah.
So when you're leaving a Revolut in London, when you're leaving a Revolut in Europe, through an open banking system, you're actually leaving a bank to go to another bank.
Mm-hmm.
Here, if you left, I'm trying to think of it, Chime as an example, you would be leaving Bancorp. Not Chime. Chime's a technology company. Bancorp is the bank. So you'd be leaving Bancorp to go to Chase or to go wherever. Yeah. So in terms of the fintech piece, it's interesting. The thing though is it was mainly 20 minutes of signaling about what the future holds for consumer protection, right? That's what it all comes down to, is like, if you're getting fucked at Bank of America because if you have less than $2,000 in your checking account, they charge you $12 a month for an account maintenance fee. Yeah. That you should have a very easy ability to shift to a different bank.
Yep.
That's like, it was 20 minutes of that. But in our industry, reading those tea leaves and reading between those lines is a really, really big deal, and also market moving information.
Interesting.
It was, I think I was telling you this a little bit earlier, but it was like the most wild 3 hours of maybe the whole show, because we had booked the director to speak, and we knew that he was going to be saying something, but because of the nature of the information that he was going to be sharing, we didn't know what it was until about 6:30, 7 a.m. the morning that he was going to be speaking at, I want to say 10, something along those lines.
Wow.
So my morning started with, like, I think it was Tuesday, so I was emceeing this day. So for me, that's a light day. It's just I have to get on stage every 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever, and dance monkey dance and get the crowd excited and pull people in for whatever's next kind of thing. You know, no big deal. But finding out at 6 or 7 a.m. information that the entire financial industry has wanted to know for at least 5 years, maybe a decade. Yeah. Because we've been talking about this for a while. Yeah. And all of a sudden, I have a 4-page speech in my inbox that I have access to.
It's going out in 3 hours.
It's going out in 3 hours.
Yeah.
It's under embargo. But for about 3 hours, myself and Rachel had access. And I mean, after I brought the rest of the team in it, because it basically turned into crisis comms. It wasn't a crisis, but it was, oh, holy shit. Yeah. This is a much bigger deal than we realized. I'm a nerd, right? So I had a hunch it was going to be 1033. Rachel had a hunch it was going to be 1033.
1033 is what?
It's the specific it's the specific number associated with
banking policy.
Open banking policy, the ruling, when it actually does become a rule.
Yeah.
So we had a hunch that was it. Like, the only thing that could come out of the CFPB that would be like very interesting would be him coming out of left field and just dropping this at Money 2020. Like that, we had a hunch, but it's really hard to prepare for a hunch, especially when you're doing 250 other pieces of content with 400 speakers and yada, 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 yada. Like, I'm not going to focus on this thing I know nothing about. So as soon as I wake up that morning, not as soon as I wake up, I get into like the staff meeting, and I get in and Rachel's just looking at me with these really big eyes. And I'm like, oh shit, like either someone died, is either great news or terrible news. And she just hands me her phone, and it's the speech. Yeah. And I start reading it, and we had like a new director of PR who's from Sweden, and like had not understood me yet. Had not understood.
Learning curve.
Yeah, had not understood like the way that happens, had not understood the way that we communicate as Money 2020 behind the scenes, especially because we have to move quickly, we're candid, and we're very tight as a group. So at the end of the day, we know that we're all good, but we might cut each other off. We might it's a little bit, the closest thing I can describe it to is kind of like an open outcry trading floor back in the 90s, just based on videos I've seen. Like it's the closest thing I can come up with, because like at one point I'm standing between 3 people. I'm answering 3 different questions here. I've got my PR person over in the corner. They're asking me questions. I'm literally I'm going like bang, 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 answering this question, running over there, answering that question.
It's like an Aaron Sorkin fucking, scene back there.
I mean, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
It had a camera there at a point. There was a camera following me, but had a camera been following me, it would have
looked pretty West Wing-y.
You would have been walking in circles. Yeah. You're like, did we just see this hallway?
Yeah.
But it was wild. So we spent the first like 30 minutes to an hour just unpacking this. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, I read the first paragraph, and as you saw, because you were there, like I put a lot of my emotion into this. 2, it's exhausting. Yeah. So like I'm kind of on the verge of
especially by Tuesdays.
Yeah, I'm on the verge of either crying or complete elation or like crying in elation. Like it's all just like it's all wild. Yeah. And I needed a cup of coffee. So I was reading. I get through the first paragraph. I get to the second paragraph. The first paragraph, I think I said fuck 3 times. My PR director was freaking out because I think she was like, oh God, is it bad? Because she doesn't know me. So get to the second paragraph, and if I remember the sentence correctly, it was something along the lines of, and this ruling will drastically change the way that the financial ecosystem is regulated going forward, which for a regulatory body
that's all caps.
That's laying a dick on the table. Yeah. That's putting it all out there. That's a bold fucking statement. That's wild, really. Yeah. And I got to that moment. I got to that sentence. I stopped. I looked up, and at this point we hadn't gotten the whole team together. Yeah. I looked at my new director of PR, who hadn't started yet, and I said, I need you to get our entire external PR team. I need you to get everybody at a table within the next 10 minutes. Yeah. I'm going to step out. I'm going to read the rest of this, and then we're going to have to react to this preemptively to be able to react to it postemptively, right? Like we need to prepare our reaction to after he says the words to put it out there. So for whatever, we ran like a half hour, me actually explaining to non-fintech people what the hell was going on, and why it mattered, and like started writing the press release and all this kind of stuff. And then for about 3 hours, we were running a conference, running a show
with a ticking bomb.
With a ticking bomb. Just like for 3 hours, I had market moving information in my head that I just had to carry on. Like all I did was, the wildest part, man, was directly after the Rohit announcement was Zach Pettet, depending on how you want to pronounce it, and depending on how much you want him and I to fight, because our names are exactly the same. Him and the chief legal officer for A16Z were getting on stage directly after. And Plaid, Zach's company, is kind of, especially in the US, the open banking company. Mm-hmm. Like the open banking company. So we have a gigantic ruling, or a gigantic signal, in the direction of something fascinating happening. And then directly after that, we have the CEO of one of the most important companies in the space expected to get up there, get interviewed by one of the most powerful lawyers in the United States, and react or not react to everything that just happened. So I was like sitting backstage as the director was talking between Zach and Jay, watching Zach's face as he like reacted to this. It was like a roller coaster. I mean, it's Zach, so he's like very stoic. He's CEO. He's a very, very successful, very smart individual, so he doesn't overreact. But you could tell that he was kind of inside of himself having a moment. Yeah. And you could tell that Jay was watching him, trying to figure out how much of a moment it was, trying to understand what direction he wanted to take the conversation, because Zach was so focused on listening to what he was saying that he's maniacal. I mean, he's, one of the smartest people in fintech, in my opinion. He studied physics. He's a DAS. He's that level smart. Okay. Kind of talks like him too, actually, has some of the same things. So you couldn't get Zach's attention for 20 minutes. Yeah. Like I was like, hey dude, how are you? Haven't seen you in a minute. Walls What's up? He's like, hey, Like, and I was like, oh, he's in that mode.
Yeah.
So I just went into like service mode. He still had his badge on. He hadn't like gotten anything stage ready. I was like, I took the badge off of his head.
Yeah.
I had to like grab a person to come mic him up so he could keep watching instead of having to leave the green room. Like,
Yeah.
it was just a wild few hours. And then the media machine just took off. Like,
Yeah.
it was probably the biggest announcement that happened, biggest like media or PR coup. It was wild.
And that's like not expected. Like, it's not like there's reporters showing up to Money 2020 expecting breaking news, really, are they?
Yes and no.
Well, there were a few. Bill Harris announced his company there.
Exactly.
There was somebody else.
We do. Adyen that night did a really big announcement that they had chartered a bank. I mean, so Adyen in a lot of ways is. I think I got to be careful about what I say about Stripe, but based on the corporate culture that has developed there as they've grown and scaled, and
you said you have said before Adyen is like Stripe's direct competitor.
Yeah,
right.
but
like the incumbent, which most people in tech I don't think would know off the top of their head,
especially
right?
in the U.S.
Yeah.
If you're abroad, if you're not in the U.S., you're probably you're more familiar with Adyen probably for the most part. And that's really not true. Stripe has just done such a good job of branding.
Yeah.
Stripe Press, Stripe everything, the simplicity, just everything about them.
Is it because they like did Adyen come from tech? They were just like kept their heads down, or did they just sort of come from somewhere other than the Valley sort of?
Yeah, I really think it's just that. I mean, they're not a U.S. company. Their CEO is based in Amsterdam.
Okay.
I don't know technically where their corporate base is. I mean, assuming I know anything about the space, it's probably like Ireland or something for tax reasons. But their CEO's in Amsterdam. They, depending on when you look at the numbers, there's been times when they were doing more volume than Stripe. There's like there's ways that you can make an argument about Adyen being a better business in some ways. Volume, I think at this point is much higher on Stripe, but it kind of comes down to the value investment you want to make and things like that. But the hype machine, because of the Collison brothers and because of YC and because of just all of, I truly think that Patrick Collison could never say another word and be considered Sam Altman, be considered Vitalik, be considered, like these. I mean, he just has done that.
I mean, I think he's fucking brilliant. Also.
He is brilliant, but he could just never say another word and still have that be his legacy.
Yeah.
I mean, he is one of the smartest people that has ever graced this industry.
Yeah.
And we need more of him. So please, Patrick, talk more. But that being said, there's something really interesting that happens around these comms teams as they get bigger, where I almost have this theory that at like 50 billion in terms of your valuation, or like 30 billion or 50, I don't know what the number is, but I almost think there's some point where you develop this like incredibly professional marketing and communications team, and they then carry on to ruin the company. Maybe not ruin the company in terms of revenue, maybe not ruin the company in terms of a lot of the company, but they definitely ruin the ability for the company to tell a story. They definitely shoot themselves in the foot 25 times before they get out of bed out of just sheer fear.
Well, you become defensive, right? Like you got something to lose, you got less, you become Goliath instead of David. So you can't punch up at anybody, and so you don't punch, so you just stay. Like there's interesting things around this. Like I remember like Warren Buffett got asked about some of his personal political views and stuff. Like this was in Omaha at the meeting, and he's like,
"Was this year?"
No, I think it was last year. He's like, I have, maybe it was this year.
I think I was sitting with you during this.
He's like, I have them. But an interesting thing about being a CEO is you can't speak as yourself. Like you represent the interest of the company. You represent the company. You represent the shareholders. You can no longer separate your person as an individual from your person as the CEO of this company, and you sort of lose the right to, or the ability, I suppose, to like speak about those things. And so he's like, I just learned not to. Like that's and Collison, they may be going through that same thing. And like J.K. Rowling was like, it's it's an interesting thing about being this famous is like I cannot whisper.
Yeah.
Anything I said is the same volume, and I lose agency over the context in which it's delivered immediately.
Yeah.
So it's hard to do. But the other direction to take this is the Balaji version, which is like all comms teams are like embedded journalists. So they don't actually work for the company. They worship the media structure, not the entity that they work for, and so they still serve the sort of interests of the media, even though they're inside the company.
If they're good at their job,
which I'm sure does not apply to everybody.
I think that's entirely the correct way to handle it.
Yeah. Being overly
but
defensive.
Rare.
Yeah, rare. Yeah. All right. So
I mean, think about the amount of value, because we can move past it, but I think that I wonder if that's shifting.
Well, the places that it's shifting are the people are all of the people that are going direct to the media, right? Like Elon fired everybody on Twitter comms and is like, no, I'll just tweet whatever I want. Like that's how we'll communicate with you. Is just that he has not had I don't think Tesla has PR.
They did at one point. He let him go.
Did at one point. I think you let him go. Like, and even people that keep their PR teams, like Zuckerberg is going on Rogan and going on Lex, and like they're just making many more efforts to communicate directly, either through whatever social media, podcast, whatever. It's very interesting. What were the other like craziest moments for you? Like, it was such a concentrated thing that it I mean, you were like front row at a Post Malone show at like 3 hours.
I can tell the story.
3 hours after you fucking interviewed Vinod Khosla, which was like an hour after you interviewed. It was just went like on and on and on. Like the life highlight moments that happened like 5 times in a day are just like insane.
I can tell the Monday story. That's probably Monday was the craziest day.
Bring on Monday.
So Monday was. I think my favorite part about Money 2020 is that like you can just like take a snapshot of any stage for the most part. You can take a snapshot of any moment between.
And there's like 5 stages happening in parallel.
5, 6, depending on how you count it. There's like 4. It's like you can't get to all of it. It's too much. The volume's overwhelming and it's wild. And also it's broad enough that you probably don't care about all of it. But so Monday we had what I would say, if you took a screenshot of Monday just on our main stage or our main stages, you could put that up against any fintech conference in the world over the last 10 years. And I think that there wouldn't be a big competition. Like it was an absolutely wild day. So I think I kind of said this earlier about like inspiration and these different kind of buckets of things. So
I'm not sure we finished naming the buckets, but
well,
whatever.
I'll name them as we walk through the story. we will identify the buckets as we walk through them. So we kind of decided Monday was going to be like open inspiration and close on inspiration. So Monday morning was we had this thing that happened Sunday night called Sunday Night Live, which was supposed to be our like biggest stage. It had 4,200 seats. I think at one point it really was full Sunday night. Excuse me. But Monday morning was Serena Williams, and turns out Serena Williams is a little bit bigger of a draw in certain ways than Adyen announcing their banking as a service and embedded finance tooling plus chartering a bank, which from my point of view is a lot of news, but Serena Williams is Serena. So we had, I think, like almost maybe over 5,000 people in that room.
It was standing room only.
Standing room only.
Packed,
It was wild. Where were you? Where were you in that?
I was standing.
You were standing like in the back?
Yeah. I got there right before it started.
Yeah. So I think that if I had to have like one highlight of fintech crowds are hard. You probably felt this as you were there. Like you walk out, you're like, "How you doing, everybody?" And they're like,
"Fine."
That's a hell of a reaction, actually.
No,
Fine
is
just
they're just
they just
silent.
kind of look at you.
Yeah, and they're not even like, it's not like they're all looking at their phones. They're just like looking at you, demanding enthusiasm from you and flatly
and
refusing.
Giving nothing back.
We're here for the information.
This
please.
is a one-way relationship, but if it's not entertaining, we'll also dock you on that.
Yep.
So it's really either way. So I think this was for me the coolest way.
If you ever go into stand up, you're gonna fucking cry. You can't.
What?
Just because, like, if you can handle a fintech crowd, if you can bring up a fintech crowd, like any comedy
you
bar,
can dodge a
any
wrench.
comedy, any like you'll be.
You can dodge a wrench. You can dodge a ball.
You can lift any room if you can lift 5,000 fintech hungover, fintech people on a Monday morning.
Well, I think that's why it was so crazy and I think why that day started on such a good foot.
Yeah.
It was the first time in my experience as an overly exuberant, won't shut the fuck up on stage yeller at crowds to get them going.
Yeah.
Also just known as, I guess, an MC. That I walked out and there was energy before I got out there.
Yeah.
There was a group of 40 people in the front that were actually going to go meet Serena afterwards.
Oh, sick.
So I think they just jumped out of bed.
Yeah.
They were there, baby. It was a standing ovation. And a couple of them were from Kansas City. So I saw them in the crowd. It was really cool. So I walked out and my job literally was just to pump up the crowd before my CEO came out. To show a video that we got Jamie Dimon to do from JP Morgan, which also I actually literally cried tears of joy when we got, because that was
a big get.
It was a big fucking get. It was really cool. So I walked out and the weirdest thing happened. People were cheering and I actually had to take them. This was the first, normally I walk out and just go. You've seen me.
Yeah.
I actually took a second. I took a breath. And I'm comfortable on stage. It's not like I don't take breaths on stage, but it's rare that I take that big of a breath before I say something, because there's usually just silence.
Yeah.
But I took a breath and people were clapping and screaming and excited to be there. Outside of the story I'm going to tell about the end of this night, it was maybe the highlight of my public speaking life. The fact that people were that excited, it just felt so fucking good. I think I was on stage for 30 seconds and I don't remember at all what I said, but it felt so good.
And it's not even from my perspective of seeing you put this thing together for the year.
Yeah.
It's not even just the crowd was good. They got to meet Serena. It was you got Serena there. You had built the sort of whole outline, the whole content, created this moment that then you got to stand inside. And that happened over and over again the whole week, but that might have been the one where it's this is a long time coming.
Yeah.
And I get to appreciate it in this instant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to your point, I said a couple words. I got off stage. I listened to Tracy, my president, CEO, say a few words. I watched the Jamie Dimon video happen just because the size of those screens and just needing to watch it happen in person.
Yeah.
And then from there, I had to run to the other stage. Well, so from there, I had to pick up Vinod Khosla, because I was basically his body man for the day.
Is he heavy?
I mean, not at this point. He skis a lot, and he had a surgery on his knee recently, so he's lost some weight. But I had to go find him, bring him to the right place. I had one of my best friends from work actually go get him from the car, because I was in the middle of introducing Serena, so I couldn't go get Vinod where I actually was. The whole thing was so weird. And then I'm just getting off stage from fucking introducing Serena Williams. I walk over and I shake Vinod Khosla's hand. Well, he's still elbow bumping. Little things like this are just kind of fun for the world to know. I feel like he walked in with a mask on and is still elbow bumping. And I don't think he's irrational. I think it makes total sense. I think he had 3 other speaking spots that day.
Yeah.
After I interviewed him, I introduced him to Serena, put them in a room for 45 minutes, took him to meet a startup, and then he left to go speak at fucking Davos. I don't know.
Also
wherever.
just smart, because he's how old? In his
70s. Yeah.
Yeah. And COVID was very much present.
Yes. Oh, 1,000,000%.
So yeah, fucking don't get COVID, Vinod Khosla.
Yeah. It stuck out to me because he was the only one in the whole show that did it.
That's a contrarian, baby.
I mean, it's
just willing to make.
It was just so
decisions.
On brand him.
Yeah.
Too. Contrarian and stuck with it.
Yeah.
Long term contrarian, and probably for good reason, and making other people feel awkward about it. You know, not really, but just like, it's like so many people went in to shake his hand as I was like, I was trying to like Sherpa him so people didn't see him.
Yeah.
But people would see him and they come over and try and shake his hand and he'd be like, nah, bitch, here's my elbow.
Here's the elbow.
You know, like,
the people's elbow.
the people's fucking elbow.
Can we, I don't know if you want to talk about like what he talked about in the interview. I got to listen to some of that one.
Yeah.
And it was fucking legendary.
Tell me what you thought.
I
black out.
I only get to see the end of it. I think I was on the other stage.
That was a good part. It takes 10 minutes to get him going. So I think the last 15 were probably most of the value.
I remember his like closing remark was this like very well thought out sort of math based approach of like finance is the most profitable industry in the United States. It's like by percent of corporate profits of public companies, it's like on the order of 30%. And he's like, that's wrong. That is not a sign of a healthy economy. That's the sign of like regulatory, that is rent-seeking behavior.
100%.
Those profits should live in other businesses, in other industries, in small businesses. And my challenge to all of the entrepreneurs in the crowd is to attack and reduce the percentage, the earnings of the finance industry. And I was like, I was literally clapping and cheering. I was the only one in the whole crowd who was like, woo, fucking hey, like, let's go. And everybody else was like, oh shit, god damn it, we gotta, like, I don't know. It's just like, that is such a gangster thing to like go out and say on a stage at a fintech
I'm pretty
conference.
Sure I was clapping with you. I think I was, yeah.
And just like, I don't know, what a badass, what a VC, what a legend, like.
What a unique VC. Like, just the vibe of that man. You know what's weird is I've never been less nervous to interview someone.
You guys had a great rapport. Is that your first time meeting?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
And we talked for 5 minutes beforehand because I was trying to solve the Serena thing. And I also, in the midst of this, I lost my laptop. So I like it.
I forgot about that. You were just like a fucking yard sale for like 4 days. There's just like something falling off of you at all times. It's hilarious. How does
that was so funny?
How do you get Serena Williams on stage?
All right. So we talked about things we can talk about and can't talk about, but it's not something I can't talk about. It's just like so straightforward. It's almost uninteresting.
Okay.
Turns out costs money.
Okay.
That's literally it. Like anybody can get Serena Williams on stage as long as you're not like I bet she would say no to Adam Newman right now. You know, she might say no to SBF. She might say no to Trump.
Yeah.
But she's capitalist.
But only very few, like almost no, like the numbers of speakers at Money 2020 was wild to me. Like the application.
In terms of high or low?
Well, one, it's a shitload of speakers, like hundreds of individual speakers.
400, over 400 this year.
Out of how many applications?
I think, so the other interesting part is that we're not, so the application number is interesting. We get, this year I believe we got 1,500 applications for pieces of content, right? But that one piece of content could be one person up on stage delivering a 10-minute presentation, or it could be, and I like to think good at our job, so we generally don't let 5 people on stage at once, but it could be 4-person panel with a moderator, right? So if you think about the average, probably 3 people for each submission. So 3 times 1,500, 4,500-ish people, something like that. Maybe more. I would say around 5, probably around 5,000 humans applied. But then you think about like you didn't apply.
Yeah, that's true.
Vinod didn't apply.
Right.
Serena didn't apply. Turns out Derek Jeter didn't apply. Brett Harrison, the ex-president of FTX, didn't apply. Like, you know, like most of our, like probably 30 to 35% of our agenda was folks that we went out and hunted.
Sought out.
Yeah. So that's the other thing is like 5,000 apply. Of those 5,000, I bet of those 400 speakers, 250 Maybe I would say
coming
2
through that process.
2 were through that 200 were through that process. So it's like Harvard-ish.
Yeah.
I think, if I'm thinking about that correctly.
I'm sure the ROI for like presenting is enormous. Like that's gotta
Huge.
be, and I know, yeah. I mean, how does it feel to like hold those keys, for lack of a better term?
I don't know. I feel like it should feel heavier. It's the reason I took this job is because of the heft.
Yeah.
Like the reason I took this job is to be the neck that turns the head of the financial industry. You know, so I take that shit super seriously.
Yeah.
Like the idea that, cause I've heard and felt and seen the impact of like, oh, we heard this on stage at Money 2020 last year, so we're gonna lean into crypto this year, or like we heard this in Money 2020 last year, so we're gonna make sure that we're working with 2 other banks to prevent fraud rings. Like I don't know, whatever stuff like that. But that shit happens, and it's not to be taken lightly. I don't think like putting a bad piece of content on our stages is at best not harmful, and at worst not harmful but uninteresting, and at worst incredibly fucking harmful to the industry, like, and to average Americans and to people that are underbanked, and to that's the other, like so many people walking around Money 2020 are like, oh, look at the end. You know, it's like, it's because it's so overwhelming that you're just like, oh, let's talk about APIs. Let's talk about KYC. Let's talk about IDV. Let's talk about acronyms. But what about like Felicia? What about fucking Henry? What about like the actual person or business owner at the end of the day that is impacted by this shit? And if you don't keep that filter on through the whole thing, like you have to put on a good show, and you have to keep people inspired, and you have to keep people learning. But you have to, like, the other like non-regulatory Trojan horse is doing the right thing. Yeah. The like having conversations in the direction of how building sustainable businesses actually come from making the right decision for your consumer or for your client or whatever.
Well,
like
that was an interesting thing too, is listening to a bunch of, I mean, I IMC'd a bunch.
Yeah. Thank you, by the way. Eric did literally everything I asked him to do for 4 days, and he knew about 1% of it when he got to Vegas.
I was like half coffee boy, half MC. It was a wild week.
You were a savior. You were
whatever it takes, baby.
You were my Jesus. Turned water into MC.
It's hearing who, like to your point, who thinks of their customer as who, right? Like,
yeah,
there's some people who go on stage and revere innovation sort of in the abstract, right? Like JP Morgan had a big spot, right? And like they talked a lot about pushing innovation, pushing technology, investing in their groups, but like they didn't talk about Henry and Felicia.
Right.
But there's other people who talk about the banks as the customer. Like, we're here to serve the banks. We're here to, like, you know.
And for them, that's true.
Sure. Yeah. Like, and
much less inspiring from my point of view. Not something I want to get out of bed every day to actually do, but important and true.
I bet for most of the companies there, the banks are the customer. And that's really like the person you have to care about. The banks are there to, like, I didn't appreciate the extent to which banks are just like an assemblage of vendors. Like when you're walking through, you're like, oh, these are all the component parts of a bank, and a bank is like a brand and a regulatory moat that gets to like shop this batch of vendors and cobble them all together and serve them to Henry and Felicia. And so
literally that is the best Main Street explanation of a bank that I maybe have ever heard. Actually, is entirely true. Outside of the top 10, top 50 banks in the U.S., which we have 4,500, like. The other 4,000 ish,
which are what you call the community banks and stuff. Like,
I mean, there's tiers to it. Like basically, community to regional to like community, sub-regional, regional to like large regional, and then you get into the B of A's kind of thing.
Is regulatory the reason that dynamic exists? Like, why?
Yes, the answer to that question about basically any conversation you have with me about fintech or finance is yes. But yeah, like, so the reason is a one like really clear example is like the reason that Chime or any of these consumer facing fintech banks, the reason that I had a job when I was at NBKC was because these consumer facing fintechs want to be able to, every time you swipe the card, if they have Bank of America behind them, this is incorrect math, and the math itself is so convoluted that it doesn't matter. But let's say every time you swipe the card on a $100 purchase with a Bank of America as your bank behind you, because of the way the interchange rules work, aka like the amount of that you can take out of that the merchant pays, you make, again, incorrect, but like let's say you make out of every $100, 1 cent or half a cent.
You, the bank.
You, the bank. Well, so the bank and you together. It's fucking confusing, dude. It's like, this is why this industry is what it is. So you and the bank together, let's say maybe make 15 cents.
Okay.
Or that's even wrong. That's wrong. 5 cents. All of these numbers are incorrect. I don't want anybody to think these numbers are correct. I'm just trying to like think about the ratios in a halfway decent way. So of the $100, you and the bank make, let's just say $1 to make it easy. I know I'm confusing everyone. Let's say $1 to make it easy. Of that dollar, that 1% interchange rate, if you have a big bank behind you, you as the fintech are probably going to make 20% of that. Okay. Something like that. And you would have to have decent volume to make that 20%. So you'll make 20 cents.
And the bank still makes 80 cents.
80 cents. The bank spent...
Because the bank has the regulatory charter.
The bank spent how much on marketing? The bank spent
0.
How much to acquire the customer?
Yeah.
The bank spent... Not shit. So... And then if you think about...
They're just the only ones who are allowed to move money in the U.S.
Exactly. It's regulatory capture.
Or lend money in the U.S.
Exactly. Regulatory capture, 100%. But if you think about community banks, and this is why I moved to $1 instead of my previous bullshit, if you spend $100 on a community bank card, a Chime card backed by a community bank, the community bank and the entity together make about $3 instead of $1.
And is that worse for the consumer or doesn't matter?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Doesn't matter. It's the merchant is paying the fee.
Okay.
Remember, I think we were standing at Woodside the other day and we were talking about like card not present versus card present. So a lot of people don't know this, but like if you dip your card versus if the card's not there and you use your phone for Apple Pay versus if you swipe the card versus if like all of those actually have different interchange rates. That's why. If you want me to get even further down the rabbit hole, I won't. Not gonna fucking happen. So you'll make, if you're a consumer fintech and partnered with a community bank, and that $100 swipe happens, you'll make they make $3. Let's say you make 45 cents instead of that 15 cents or whatever it is, right? Yeah. You make like 3 times as much. That's because of a policy, a regulation put in place called the Durbin Amendment. So under the Durbin, basically it's banks under this level of assets make more interchange because we want small financial institutions in the U.S. to be able to compete with these big banks.
Interesting.
Right? So banks were too big to fail in 2008. As a result of that, we want to create a regulatory kind of prop up for the smaller banks, create a little regulatory benefit to them, especially as fintech is happening, to give them an ability to ride this wave in the way that the group that has $12 billion to put into innovation doesn't. Yeah. So that's how a lot of this competition has happened. Actually, it's all comes down to the regulation. Like
interesting.
BBVA, as an example, shut down their banking as a service business
because they couldn't compete with the community banks.
There's a lot of reasons, but if I had to read the tea leaves, I'd say it just comes down to the most of the way that you make money in this industry is interchange. And if you're too big, you don't get to make as much interchange. It's that straightforward.
That's so fucking wild.
It's that fucking, yeah.
Like that can't have been the most efficient regulatory policy for supporting
I mean,
whatever,
Dodd-Frank happened, the Durbin Amendment.
Super far out of my depth on that, and I'm sure these are much smarter people than I am, like working on this kind of shit. It's
well,
just
and
interesting,
I'm
like,
also oversimplifying.
Sure.
Like it wasn't just like, oh, let's change interchange rates. Like, there's a lot more to it.
Is that why
capital requirements also changed as a result of these?
Entrepreneurs or founders or whatever are just like straight up buying their own community banks?
Yeah.
Because that's like that actually is the ticket to play the game, and then you can innovate with all kinds of cool business models on top of that because you actually own the charter.
You just completely put it together, 1,000,000%. So one of the companies that we were supposed to have, which, speaking of shit that's gotten interesting, one of the companies that we were supposed to have speak at Money 2020 is a company called Column, which is Column Bank is actually what it's called because they went out and they bought a bank. Okay. And this is a fascinating, I think, wonderful human named William Hockey, who was the co-founder with Zach at Plaid. So billionized, billionized again, and went out and, bought a bank. And him and his wife are the co-founders of this bank, and they're literally building it into a banking as a service bank. And like the wild part about it is that this whole industry has talked so much about digital first banking but that just means like a better mobile app so you can deposit your check without going to the bank.
Yeah.
That's not
table stakes now. Yeah.
It's not fucking innovation. Like so much of this is just lipstick on a goddamn pig, and none of it's actually about like moving money faster or anything like that. Like remote check capture is good. It's inherently a good innovation, but now I take it for granted, so I'm like, move on to the next one, bitch.
Yeah.
Anyways, so this is what I would call like a tech first bank, where all you have is the charter, and instead of going out and buying, to your point, that core system from FIS or Finastra or wherever or Fiserv, and picking your own KYC vendor and like going shopping, you build it.
They're building all of it.
You build it. I mean, I would imagine that they're probably partnering on certain pieces. There's certain pieces of it's like there's certain pieces that it's incorrect to say that they're like AWS, but it's like if you don't just like it's already built, bitch, just buy it,
right?
Or like open source, use it, whatever. So I'm very certain that they're not probably doing their own KYC in terms of like they probably have multiple vendors, because there's a world now where if you stack like 3 of these KYC vendors, you're pretty much covered to the point where like that actually should be a product that someone puts together. But it's the core system is tech first, which means money moves faster, which means on-ramps.
They're building their own core provider.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that even legal?
Yeah.
I thought you had to be on a core because that was like where the
Bank of America builds their own core.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it's a matter of you need to be able to have a core that is
compliant,
that is auditable and compliant.
Okay.
And that is
it's just
hard.
It's fucking hard and expensive.
Yeah, it's fucking hard to do.
Okay.
And but there's multiple strategies associated with this too. So there's the William version of going out and buying a bank.
Yep.
There's buying a bank and building it in a tech first manner and like just stripping out everything out. Basically, he went to a bankruptcy auction and bought a bank at a bankruptcy, like the same way you
for
would a
the
car.
charter, because it takes 25 years to get a charter.
It takes time.
Yeah.
And not 25 years necessarily, but it takes time. And they stopped granting them for a long time to the point where the only way you were going to get a bank is buying one.
Taxi medallions, baby.
Exactly. Very similar. But to the point where now because Uber didn't work in this industry or is still getting built in Web3, whatever.
So, I would say still getting built, right?
Yeah.
Like we talked about that a little bit. The like peer-to-peer stuff is like dubiously legal, but there's end runs around some of the charter things.
Yeah.
I mean, like whether that's good or not is totally
you can run really fascinatingly good for consumer businesses like solo funds until they get to a certain size, I think. And I think there's still a way solo funds can work. There's still a way all these businesses can work. Like I'm never going to be the person to say like never, but inherently, even if you're doing something that's good for the world, if it breaks a regulation, once you get big enough, you're going to have problems.
Yeah, or you go the like BitTorrent route and it's like, I mean, they ended up with problems, I guess, eventually anyways, but like.
And that's the thing is like, if you're doing something good for the world, you shouldn't have to go the BitTorrent route. Like it's, Travis is, speaking of solo, like to go to that example, Travis is one of the best people I've met in my life.
Yeah.
He's so fucking smart. He's so driven. All of his heart is completely in the right place.
And you got to assume the regulator's heart is in the right place also, right? Like this is like the Uber metaphor is decent here because that wasn't legal when they started either. They just got so big so fast and drove so much consumer demand and like organized this amazing sort of like groundswell of support that they changed what was legal.
Yeah.
And you hope, and regulators, I think to their credit, realized, oh, our goal with the taxi medallion was to make it like safe and predictable and tracked and like create a good experience for consumers so that they don't get like robbed, murdered, and otherwise cheated. And Uber does what we were trying to do with taxi medallions, but in real time with perfect tracking. Like, yes, it's centralized a little bit through a service, but we're accomplishing the goals of the regulator with technology, and you would like, you got to give people the benefit of the doubt. Like, I assume the regulators are not just like what rent are they seeking, right? Like, they want good things for consumers. They should hopefully see. It's just like that dance of like, can you get big enough, fast enough, and drive enough consumer demand, and show the regulators who you are and what you're accomplishing to change the system, because everything's malleable, right? Like, we tend not to think of the regulations as malleable, but they are. Yeah. Pardon me while I murder my thirst.
Murder that thirst.
I know you're trying to get sponsored by Liquid Death.
Yeah, just pop as many of those as you can. Actually, even before you even drink that one, just open 2 more. So I agree. I think it is a good analogy. But the other thing about it is Travis Kalanick. And if you separate, like, think about who Travis Holloway is as a person and who Travis Kalanick is as a person.
Yeah.
People listening to this do not know Travis Holloway, so I will explain. Not a maniacally driven, insane person that's like
willing to make a kamikaze run at the U.S. government.
That. Yes, thank you for filling in the rest of that blank, because I wasn't sure how I was going to phrase exactly that. He's not that. Yeah. And the problem with that is that he is the definition of most of the people that are going to come into financial services and innovate in a positive way. Most of them aren't run through walls kind of people. They're really good people, and most of them can, like Jimmy Chen's a great example. Actually, he's a good and a bad example. He runs a company called Propel. They basically have built a fintech layer on top of the food stamps / EBT system, and allow people that are on EBT to is it called, am I not supposed to call it EBT anymore? What's it called? Step? It's called something else now that I can't remember what it's called, but when I was a kid I could have. Anyway, that allows people to like actually run their lives whilst on that public benefit in a way that feels like they just have a bank account. Right? So Jimmy is a great example of somebody that is an amazing human. Obviously, he's from Overland Park. So that's a very key thing. But he's so soft-spoken. Yeah. But I also know him to be somebody that would literally run through, like he would not, but this is the difference, is like he would run through walls, but he wouldn't murder his dog, you know, or like murder his mom, or like, I don't know. I've never met Travis Kalanick, but like the way that he is portrayed, and like the way that level, like even the way that people talk about some pieces of Elon, or talk about some pieces of, I mean, definitely Zuck, like some of the stories that I've heard about the Zuckerberg backyard barbecues, like it sounds wild. That I don't think exists inside of like financial wellness fintech. And financial wellness fintech is the groups that actually give a shit of what we're talking about, which brings me fucking full circle to regulators and policymakers creating the need for everyone to do that. And then all of a sudden Travis Kalanick has to come into this industry because we have 30% of what, you know, the Vinod stuff, and build something gigantic, but do it hopefully somewhat compliantly. It's a hard thing, man.
So is it going to come from like the dark recesses of Web3, and like we're just going to have to build like, I think it's a really interesting future to imagine. Like there was a whole track on Web 2.5 at Money 2020, and I don't know how much credit they deserve in 2022 for like paying attention to crypto and DeFi and Web3, but like there was not a shortage. Like, if anybody's curious, there's not a shortage of people in traditional finance paying attention to blockchain and crypto companies. Like,
oh, for sure,
they are entering the mainstream, even though you don't see it really anywhere yet.
Yeah. So that's the interesting part. The Web 2.5 thing this year was like really my baby, and it took a lot of thought. It was one of the weird things that took a lot of thought and not as much work, because actually so many people, to your point, are paying attention to it. The weird thing in retrospect was that last year we were coined as like Crypto 2020. In 2021, they instead of Money 2020, like the post-emptive, like the post-show feedback was like, oh, it was crypto was everywhere. Yeah. Because I think Bitcoin was at 50. Like, just
everybody was talking about it everywhere
because of prices. Yeah. It was just because of prices is all it came down to. Yep. And this year, I would say that we had drastically more cryptocurrency oriented conversations, a lot more cryptocurrency oriented conversations. We just pivoted it so it wasn't about Ethereum, and it wasn't about Bitcoin, and it wasn't about what weirdly has become gambling asset classes. Yeah. It became about the rails. It became about the blockchain. It became about like the way that on-ramps and off-ramps from TradFi to DeFi, like that is
custody
something.
Solutions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Use cases.
Yeah.
And I think that is the thing that resonated with people this year in a way that they were like, oh, that felt kind of like the fact that people don't think that was that out there. It makes me so happy.
And seeing that scene and like that, it changed a little bit. That was a new thing for me to see. Like previously, I sort of I had my head sort of wrapped around like Web3 and crypto world, and I sort of have my head wrapped around fintech, mostly thanks to you. And I just did not understand how and where they interacted at all. If they ever would. Like, I was like, crypto either won't exist because it'll never be legal, or not, it won't exist, but like will never become useful in mainstream because it will never figure out how to interact with
Am I going to use it to buy my
legal way
coffee?
to move money around, which everybody has to eventually comply with to some extent for most of the purchases that they make in life. It wasn't obvious that finance would figure out how to incorporate that. And now, like, coming away from Money 2020, it's like, oh, that's going to happen. Like, those two, there is a big like place where they're trying eagerly to like understand each other and work together. And there are like founders bringing crypto custody solutions and utility and platforms. And there are banks that are showing up to that conference and hunting down companies that are like, I know crypto is important. Help me figure out as a bank how to deliver something new to my customers and show them what they might want. Can I get faster transfers? Can I get streaming payments? Can I have a wallet where they have private money? Can I help people custody things in places that they, whatever, all of the things that are cool and come with that nationally and internationally, right? Like a ton of sort of developing world use cases too, which was really interesting.
It was, I mean, one of the things we hoped that people took away from this year was that it was an international show, because this is not a U.S. industry. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, if anything, like look at what's been, and I have been avoiding the news as much as I can, so I don't know everything about this story right now, but like even just looking at FTX, they're fucked outside of the U.S. Yeah. They're not fucked here because of our regulatory system. Yeah. You know, and it's really interesting how it just keeps coming back to that. Yeah. And as much as like the world was upset about Gary Gensler, I mean, it's like, you know, he's anti this, like a lot of the regulation that was put in place that really pissed people off is what protected FTX US and what protected FTX US shareholders, or what, you know, like them being okay is because of our regulatory system, not because of like the FTX team deciding to do something differently in the US out of ethical or business reasons. Yeah. You know, so it's just, it all comes back to that. But yeah, Web3, the only way that we actually move in a direction of remittance businesses and money movement across different country, like actually that working, is it has to be on a blockchain, I think. Or we actually have to just agree on a global standard, which is not going to fucking happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a very international. That was was more international than I was expecting. Certainly, like I heard a bunch of different languages, and there was like a panel on African remittance founders and like all kinds of interesting stuff.
Yeah.
And I know your interview with was it Mariana?
Yeah, that was part of that Monday. Should we circle back to the Monday?
Circle back to Monday.
Circle back to Monday. Okay, so we did the Vinode, finished with Vinode. The second interview of that day was me. Was these guys?
OnlyFans.
Yeah.
Zach reached behind his OnlyFans sweatshirt to pull out his OnlyFans throw pillow.
I'm not wearing my OnlyFans sweatshirt.
You just took it off.
I took it off before the show.
You got a hat too.
I mean, they make nice swag.
You just started your OnlyFans account today.
Yeah, the world doesn't need to know that. I haven't decided.
Subscribe now for TBD.
Yeah, I just don't even know what I'm using it for. I'm like, it might be for my podcast. It might be for. I don't know. We'll find out. Who knows?
They were on. You interviewed them. So I interviewed their CEO.
Yeah, I interviewed their CEO and their CFO.
Okay.
On stage that same day. So that was the second one.
What was like the story that they had to tell the world of fintech?
The story. I mean, the fascinating part. It's really interesting. So to your point, I have an OnlyFans now. There's still nothing on there because I got it like a few days ago, and also because I don't know what I'm going to use it for, but also because the actual reason that I signed up and the actual reason that I'm doing this was because I wanted to go through the KYC process. One of the things that I've been most fascinated by is this idea that OnlyFans is a bad thing for the world, or like they're porn, they're bad. Like, whatever. If you're part of the whatever religious sect that is anti-porn, like, okay, have that conversation over there. But this idea that OnlyFans is a bad thing or like horrible for the world because they have children on the platform or whatever, now I think I disagree with that idea vehemently. Have they fucked up in the past? Did they have rough moments? 1,000,000%. Did shit happen on that platform that never should have fucking happened? Probably. I don't know all the stories, but like based on what I've heard, seems like it. And if you read the right news, they fucked up. But there's a reason they have a new CEO. There's a reason that a lot has changed there. And one of the people that I talk to a lot is their CFO. And we talk, I mean, we're friends, but we talk about a lot of like IDV stuff. We talk about payment processing. We talk
IDV?
about identity verification.
Okay.
Because the biggest issue they had, or the biggest issue they want to make sure the world does not think they have, is under 18.
Yeah.
Right? And I will tell you with very, very strong conviction, that shit was hard. That nobody would go through what I went through to get this OnlyFans account to get a bank account. It's there were 14 layers. I mean, that not actually, but there were, I think, 3 layers of facial recognition, 3 or 4 different ID checks, selfie with the ID that you took a picture of. You have to share multiple other social media accounts so that they can verify that you're you and that you've been posting like an actual human.
Yeah.
And also, when I say they go verify, I actually mean they go verify. Like they have an actual team. Like a lot of it is automated, a lot of it's machine learning, but they also have a team that is associated with going in and actually running pieces of manual KYC to make sure you are who you say you are. Like, when you look at it and you're like, this is 2 times safer than what I need to get into any of my crypto wallets. This is 4 times safer than what I need to get into any of my bank accounts. Like, this shit is wild. And they have a payments layer in it, right? Yeah. So there's 2 pieces to the conversation. One is we're safe as shit. We're safe as shit. We're safe as shit. We're safe as shit. That's the first piece. Okay. The safest social media platform.
Yeah.
Which I agree with. It feels like marketing talk, and it is, but I agree with it. 2 is because of, and this is where you just get nerdy, because of this association with adult content, they have a hard time partnering with payment processors. So in the same way, or banks. Yeah. So in the same way that like if you're a not gaming like Modern Warfare, but gaming like DraftKings company, or if you're a cannabis company, or if you're OnlyFans, Patreon doesn't really have this issue, but because of the association with OnlyFans, they have this issue. You have a really hard time getting those partnerships because of a lot of things. One is reputational risk. Two is actually fraud rates and returns and things like that.
Which is more expensive for the payment provider to work
exactly,
with.
Exactly. So if you think about like there's this thing called
social risk and the financial risk.
Exactly. But the financial risk, I think, is the interesting part, because there's these things called merchant category codes. So if you run a restaurant, that's a specific merchant category code, and you will generally get X amount of returns, X amount of disputed transactions, X amount of fraud. If you're in this merchant category code, aka the adult content merchant category code, those numbers are very different than if you run a restaurant, for a lot of somewhat obvious and somewhat unobvious reasons, actually, but that's a whole different thing. OnlyFans has the lowest fraud rate, lowest pretty much everything in their merchant category code because of all of this technology that they've built and the fact that they're really a tech-first creator economy company. Yeah. So they still, with these numbers, with this volume, they've done $10 billion in fucking creator payments since their inception. $10 billion.
I think they did.
What?
How old are they?
I think they were started in 2020.
No shit.
2019. Let's Google it real quick.
I mean, keep talking. I'll look it up.
I think it was 2019 or 2020.
Still, I can't imagine they're more than 10 years. $10 billion?
They did $4 billion last year.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. So they
2016.
2016?
Yeah, so they're 6 years.
But I think the inflection, like, okay, very much
founded.
I'm sure. I'm sure it was
Google's
that makes total sense. Like, founded in 2016. But if you look at the revenue curve, COVID.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like that's when the shit hit the fan. And that's why, like, it's basically like, oh, I'm locked at home. I wonder what I could do to make some money. Da 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 da. Oh, I'm naked. All right, here we go. You know, like,
I mean, is that an accurate characterization of OnlyFans?
I don't think so.
Like, what percent of? Do you have any idea what percent of that stuff is actually like?
It's they're careful about sharing it, and I mean, the other thing to be honest about is like, who cares? You know, it's like it's a platform.
It's just one of those things where, like, as soon as it's associated, it's the only thing people think about.
And that's why they come to Money 2020. Yeah. People are so confused about why they come. They come to tell the story about their numbers, and they come to talk about the fact that they're protecting creators, and there isn't that much of an issue when it comes to that. So anyways, I don't know what that distribution is, but I want to say that they said over the last 2 years, I think over the last 2 years, it was $8 billion.
That's a lot. Is it bigger than Patreon?
Yeah. 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 I mean, Patreon's like cornered comedy. Okay. You know, cornered podcast. The paywalled podcasting thing, they've cornered it.
Interesting.
But also Whitney Cummings just moved over onto OnlyFans, and she's moving her podcast over there. Yeah. And the reason that I have an OnlyFans account, it started with they wanted me to put my podcast gated content on there. Yeah. And I might do that. I don't know. But anyways, they want to just come tell that story and get more payment processors to work with them and get regulators to understand that they're different and have those conversations and build those relationships. They came to Amsterdam, which was less than a year ago. And between Amsterdam Money 2020 and Money 2020 US, I can't remember the number exactly. They actually, I think, said it on stage, but I want to say they got like 2 or 3 more payment processing partnerships. And because they're so international, like they need a lot of them because of the interoperability and everything else. So
God, that sounds hard.
It's super fucking hard. It's super, super hard. And OnlyFans is simultaneously like the easiest company to build, I feel like, because it's just like you build a piece of thing and then like it's the ultimate jobs to be done kind of conversation, right? It's just like you build something and then like what they do with it. Yeah. You don't know if it's the milkshake. You don't know if milkshake's for breakfast. You don't know if the milkshake is for enjoyment. You know, if you haven't
the milkshake brings the boys to the yard.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder how many people track that.
If I know my audience, everyone.
Yeah. If you're not a Clayton Christensen
absolutely
fan,
everyone. India's probably confused, but everybody in America's got it.
Oh, it's so funny.
Okay, what? I know a good part of your thought and your job goes into like the overarching story that Money 2020 tells, right? Like of these, 500 speakers and tracks and talks over 4 days of multiple stages, it all ladders up to like a story about the fintech industry that like you see from your kind of perch. What was that?
Okay, so I'll give you the hard part about this is that the reason that this story exists. The reason this story exists is because I had to come up with a story. My team and I had to come up with a story to tell that helped people orient around those content applications we talked about. And classically, events and conferences have themes, right? So if you're in like the easiest industry to think of when it comes to that, it's maybe like fashion, right?
Yeah.
This is what's hot this fall. Here's the themes.
Yeah.
Like it actually makes sense to have themes. But when it's kind of like you do a software conference, what are the themes? As software is eating the world. It's like maybe that's the theme.
And when it's finance, which is underlies
the world.
Yeah.
And when you're combining it finally with software and you're combining it with embedded finance, which is actually like providing checking accounts to Uber drivers, and like fintech is eating the world. So the actual story is fintech is eating the world. But the story that I told this year, the story that we kind of continuously told this year to the public, like kind of rooted around 4 things. So one was vulnerabilities. It's been a fucking vulnerable few years, right? Coming out of COVID, inflation, stagflation, who knows what's next? Like we're all unsure. A lot of us lost jobs. A lot of us lost income, family members. I mean, it was fucking nuts. Out of that comes, especially in the financial industry, 2 ways of positioning yourself. One is defensive, and you stop lending. You just lock it down. You lay off part of the staff, just surviving. We're going to survive. The other side, which is really fucking hilarious now, because the main group that I would use as this example was FTX, is to go on the offensive and to go and to make acquisitions and to
add
invest,
leverage, buy, market, hire. Yeah,
exactly. And at the point that I was telling this story, I was like, FTX is the shining example of exactly what to do. It's fucking hilarious.
Well, they did it they levered assets that didn't exist to do it, instead of having a very conservative balance sheet, knowing or waiting for the tide to turn to play from a hand of strength. So like, not quite the way Munger would have done it, but like, I like the strategy of being offensive, when everybody
exactly
else,
from the
greedy
outside,
when everyone else is fearful. But.
Yeah, from the outside, if you don't know the balance sheet.
And if it worked, it still would have looked brilliant.
Very true. That's kind of how that works. So then there's the offensive stance, right? And that can lead to a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
But the other thing interesting about the FTX thing is that the third pillar of that story is chain reactions and ripple effects. Unexpected ones specifically. Right. So if you go on the defensive and you stop lending, or if you go on the defensive, you lay off staff, something all of a sudden happens, you need to like all of these different things, the impacts of where we're at actually with FTX now, like there's especially in the financial industry, the impact, not
you
just
stop
the impact.
lending, but your revenue goes down. Right. So you invest less in innovation. And so like,
it's a flywheel, but it's also unexpected and unintended consequences in random areas that you probably never would have guessed. Like there's just random shit that happened this year that I don't think people saw come. Like it was weird. So that was a piece of it. The end piece of it though, and I think the most exciting part, like I was talking about lipstick on a pig earlier, the most exciting part is experiences, and actually finally having a shift into disruptive technology, right? So this is the thing, is like, as I would explain this to people that didn't understand like the actual definition of disruptive technology, I wouldn't say this because it was too complicated, and I would just say experiences are getting better.
Yeah.
But actually what I mean is that the experience with setting up your MetaMask wallet, connecting it, buying your first NFT, all of that is so bad that we're finally at a point where experiences are going to get better, right? Like the disruptive technology is here. It sucks.
Yeah.
And give it like 3 years and the whole world's going to change. So that's actually what I meant by experiences. And then this next year, I think we've already kind of figured it out over the last 3 weeks. But I think it's
that was quick.
Well, I think when you put together, it was Rachel's idea, but when you put together everything that happened over the last year, it kind of is just like the beginning of a hero's journey. It's just like a protagonist kind of like
we're entering the other world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I won't say anything more, but I think the story this year is going to be very
interesting,
hero's journey-ish. Yeah.
Love me some Joseph Campbell, baby. Let's go.
I mean,
it's going to be great.
Exactly.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
All right.
How we doing?
Thank you for the overview. Do you want to add anything? Any other like last highlights or dangles or?
Let's finish Monday. Okay. So
moments of
two more
beauty?
things. After the OnlyFans interview, are we good on battery?
We're good on battery.
Okay. After the OnlyFans interview, I interviewed Mariana Van Zeller, who is the host of a show called Trafficked on National Geographic, with the CEO of a company called SoCure, which focuses a lot on IDV, but also relates to money laundering. So this woman is an absolute hero of mine, and
She's an animal.
She's a fucking animal. If you haven't watched Trafficked, audience, like if you're listening, I cannot recommend this shit enough. It is the best show to understand dark markets, and it is the best show to help you understand the human impact of the fact that we don't catch money laundering and the human impact of these dark markets. So amazing show. Also just scary as fuck. Like you will literally sweat through the whole thing. And meeting her was maybe the highlight. I mean, she was a fucking amazing. Meeting Vinod was really cool. Yeah. Having a conversation with Serena was really cool. But like Mariana is an unbelievable human and one of my like favorite journalists of all time. So that was dope. And then from there, I finally allowed myself to have my first drink of the whole show. After that, I think I got drinks with my boss and just like debriefed for a minute, and then proceeded on to a private 350 person Post Malone concert where I literally got to stand in the front row with some of my favorite people on earth and have just like the most elated, wild dopamine rush of a fucking hour that I've had in my life.
Feel like a rock star. Congratulations.
Exactly.
Going psycho.
I mean, you keep saying all this, I'm going to like you.
Yeah.
So that was the day. That was the end of Monday.
That's a crazy day. And no wonder Tuesday was a blur, baby.
Tuesday was a fucking blur. And then we went on to make actually a difference. So, yeah. Anyways, that's that.
What an amazing, like, it was so cool to see you go through that week and just at minimum survive it was fucking crazy. It was like all of the biggest days of somebody's life sort of in a row. And I was like, damn, this is going to happen again next year too.
No shit, right? That's the wildest part of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you? Do you have any closing thoughts?
I was listening in the limited prep that I did for this conversation to
when
to
you're
some of our
one of your best friends,
some of our previous podcasts, and there was a line in there that you had said as you moved through like sort of the finance industry in your career that your definition of success for your career had changed, and it had become to leave the industry better than you found it, and know that you had an impact on doing it. And I know that's your goal for your whole career, but it was so clear watching that happen, watching that week, knowing the year that you had put into it, and then seeing sort of the trend of this happening for maybe years at a time. And I think the way you put it in this podcast was really good, like being the neck that turns the head of the fintech industry. And
big fat Greek wedding quote, but yeah.
Perfect. And just knowing you the way I do, and knowing how, like, the unique mix of like awareness, broad worldview, ambition, and like deep human give a shitness. And I'm just like so glad that there is you or someone like you in this place doing this job, and that head will get turned by a neck that is very, very deliberate, and that's a really, like, I sleep easier knowing that, and it's just like really fucking cool to see. And I hope that all these other industries that are ridiculously important and have incredible, crazy confluences of regulators and parties and downstream effects on millions of people that will never even approach grokking the complexity of the system that serves them, has somebody who gives a shit about them and is working hard on the same stuff. It was a beautiful sort of machine to peek inside for a week, and I'm really glad I did. I'm glad you're in there doing your tinkers, making it all happen.
I appreciate you. I mean, truly, pieces of it could not have happened without you. So I appreciate the hell out of you.
You got it. It was beautiful. And I can't wait to see how much of these sort of like predictions or to see if like what we peak at plays out in any way, the way we think it's going to, or the way we hope it's going to. I think it's really interesting. And I think, like we talked in the last podcast and this one, about the ripple effects that these decisions have from the policymakers or the founders or the entrepreneurs or the banks, and how it all plays out for normal people. It's just really cool to see.
Isn't it fucking weird?
What a wild world.
What a wild world.
Wild world.
From breakfast, whatever it was, like 7 years ago, and me trying to run away from you, to here we are.
Yeah.
Now.
Podcast soulmates.
Exactly.
Smart friends for the win.
Smart friends for the win.